Hello and welcome to the Team Meta College Conference Spring Showdown. Orange corner as red. Oh my goodness, watching it as it
being like a void space for community building.
Now you can see these freshmen and sophomores that have not had that interaction at all. They're completely online because of COVID.
He said, oh my gosh, Osaka!
Welcome back to the show. We're here with Mike Aguilar. He is the Esports Director at the University of Oklahoma. And tell me, Mike, how does one get into the business of esports in college? It must be a lot of work.
First of all, thanks for having me. And I'm excited to share some insight from the perspective in the Sooner State and in the heartland of the United States. And so that question is one that is absolutely a variant between each school and each culture and each climate. For the OU story, the CIO of IT back in 2016 had attended an Amazon summit and then came back and said, basically, what is Twitch? And that started the process of R&D and providing some use cases of what was happening. Now, in 2016, though, in the United States and Canada, there was less than 25 universities of institutionally supported elevation. And only one of them was a Power 5 Division I distinction, the more formidable athletics brands in the space, and that was Utah. And they had just elevated, like literally the same week that I started R&D. So now, fast forwarding into 2020 for perspective, for viewership, we're well over 200 universities of institutional support in that 4-year term. And more than 400 universities, it looks like, that have at least some level of elevation past just an interest-based student organization.
Do you have a projection in the next 4 years where that could be?
No, but I mean, based on that trend, I mean, that's pretty, expansive growth. And it's easy to see, I guess, to make the most conservative assumption is that it'll still double. So that 400 number, the bigger number that I provided is more about the students that are past like an interest-based student org. Every university has it. It doesn't matter if it's like an anime club or something that's just a niche kind of interest group. And then they kind of get into this competitive classification or sports club designation that's not quite athletics. And it's kind of that hybrid state that does have some institutional support at some level. And then you have your varsity programs that are institutionally supported, starting to develop venues, maybe providing scholarships and having funded staff that are dedicated to the development. So I honestly see that number doubling or even tripling in the next same duration. So another 4 or 5 years, because universities are missing out on recruitment, especially when we're talking to the audience of prospective students in this age demographic.
Right. And
even more so after 2020 and the infusion and explosion that we've seen with online content creation and games like Among Us that have allowed us to still stay very social despite the pandemic considerations.
What have you noticed in the past few years how the stigma has changed for esports?
So 2020, there's no negating the fact that 2020 did cause quite a bit more explosive energy in this topic as administrations and older generations struggled to interact and engage students on campuses in a completely virtual state. And the funny and hilarity and the irony of it is that gaming communities and cultures have been thriving online since the early 2000s. With the dawn of multiplayer gaming and online communities and in the early days PHP forums and games like World of Warcraft and MMOs in general. So part of my title is Director and Director of Esports and Co-curricular Innovation, and that co-curricular part is really where the bridge comes in, where technologies and tools like Discord and the way that we interact in social media and the ways that we engage each other in game now provides a very respectable and very powerful means to bridge the generational gap of how do we communicate despite maybe being baby boomer generation, Gen X, or even millennial that's not necessarily tech savvy, and then obviously Gen Z. So part of the elevation for us at OU came from leveraging technology and gaming technology specifically to conquer some of the business needs of the university. And the prime example that was really kind of that flagship thing that happened was in May of 2020, we partnered with a company that creates a virtual platform that's built in 3D. So it's very much an MMO. You have an avatar, and in that platform, you're able to recreate a space, whatever that space may be. So we leveraged that technology to put on a global career fair and therefore mitigated COVID as much as possible, still provided face-to-face communications, voice-to-voice, text-to-text, and still allowed some interaction in regards to downloading, brochures for programs or universities, providing keynote visibility to an audience, kind of really mitigating some of the impacts and actually growing the opportunity of reach because of the nature of just being connected and the convenience of it. So for universities that have, international programs or have international outreach or travel abroad, you can use that technology to engage and make the world feel smaller for getting information out and being touchable and being able to connect. And that's gaming technology allowing, traditional business workflows to be able to thrive regardless of COVID.
Is it surprising a lot of people who weren't involved in esports in colleges?
Yes, absolutely. And again, that goes to the stigma statement of this is that, naturally, a lot of the stigmas and a lot of the stereotypes across, against gamers is, gamers are lazy. They're not academically achieving. They tend to just be, unproductive or undriven. And that's quite the opposite. Sure, there's a large population of that stereotype in the gaming communities. However, when we talk about the esports component, the part of the actual performance metrics and the things with that, then, at the professional set level, we're seeing, organizations that have contracts for nutritional standards, wellness standards. They have behavioral and psychology professionals on retainer. And these are all things that can absolutely also trickle back to a traditional workforce, because if we're talking about ergonomic standards and you're sitting at your desk 8 hours,
Right.
that absolutely relates and it correlates. We're talking about eye strain, and that wellness component, again, correlates between the worlds. And so it was really, one, it required some maturity from the universities to see opportunities of innovation with it, but it also required somebody to help translate between those two worlds. So how do we kind of break some of that stereotypes in the gaming and what we think the stereotypes are and what it actually is? And the only way that we were able to do that and the strategy that we deployed was we're just going to go out and actually execute this, document it, so we can provide relevant use case data and analytics from OU's campus and culture versus trying to reference what somebody else is doing that may be in California or New York, which culturally does not represent the communities and cultures in Oklahoma.
Do you think that the age of coronavirus sped up the process? Do you think that it sort of aided colleges to sort of be more open to esports in their curriculum?
Absolutely. The one wonderful truth about esports development in any institution of anything, and regardless of pro sector, higher education, or even grade school, K through 12, is that the overhead of spinning up an esports program is relatively low. We're talking about a computer lab, a glorified computer lab if you had venue. We're talking about just creating an opportunity that putting on events that don't require much overhead to get started versus the cost needed to build a football stadium or anything else. And so a lot of universities had to cut programs because of the physical constraints of COVID. And so they had more money, despite the budgets were lowering from enrollment, but they still had more loose money to be able to invest in something and try something. And so esports was a pretty big contender because of that low overhead, despite the potentials of risk involved. And they absolutely capitalized on it.
That makes a ton of sense, actually. It conformed with the times.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So tell me your backstory. Where did you come from? How did you get started?
So to date myself, I'm 38. So I'm the first wave of millennial generation. And we got our first console in the household and in around the mid 80s in West Germany. So we were stationed in Germany, Army brat, and we were raised, in Germany when the wall was still up. And we used that Atari and the Apple IIe that we had at the time as a family engagement, very much the board games back prior to that time. And so the family would get together and we would actually, support each other. I remember seeing my brother actually play and beat Pitfall in the early days, take a photo of the game credits, send it to Activision, and then get a signed poster in the end. So it was a family affair very early on, versus where I'm seeing a lot, not all, but a lot of families, providing game consoles, not because their kids just want them, but also kind of functioning as a babysitter. And for us, it wasn't that. It was something for the family to do together, especially when we were displaced outside of the US. But the real big kind of stride, and I grew up with every console. It doesn't matter, Atari to NES to Super NES to Sega Genesis to Dreamcast to Xbox Original to PlayStation 1, 2, 3, 4. And now 5 in the current generations, and then obviously PC as well. And the real big change in mentality was in the late 90s when Blizzard StarCraft Brood War, which really kind of brought the current esports renaissance into its first kind of stride as it created that multiplayer environment. And then we saw the original, the first individuals get sponsored in StarCraft, which kind of set the stage for higher levels of support and investment and sponsorship in Korea. So the real claim to fame for me that really kind of helped me catch my stride and find the strength to do these types of things and innovate was World of Warcraft. And I was extremely introverted. So interviews like this would not have been something that I would have even entertained. I would have literally had social anxiety to the point where it would have just been completely inhibitive of me even presenting in any fashion to anybody. And World of Warcraft helped me find that community of peers of like mind, of common interest. And we took it seriously. So it didn't mean that we were like hardcore, our life is this. But the thing that was beautiful about it, the first kind of real realization of its power, came from the fact that in that guild, in that community, I had, stay-at-home moms. I had 16-year-old teenagers. I had professional corporate employees, white-collar, blue-collar jobs, service members, people in other time zones, people in other countries. And so in the mid 2000s, that is globalized leadership training and all kinds of things if we translate that back to tangible skill sets. And in that environment, in the early World of Warcraft days, you had to coordinate 40-man raids to accomplish a task of very high stress, second by second, to accomplish that mission. And so that translated into a lot of skills that I'm absolutely leveraging today. One, how to put together a community and be empathetic and balance intentionality with leisure, as well as transcending, generational or the backgrounds of people, whether they were raised in, different heritage or different religion or anything. All that kind of didn't matter. And that's the power of what the gaming and esports topics represent as the great equalizer for inclusion. And it doesn't mean that we don't have problems with those things, obviously,
Sure.
Lack of more women in representation in the professional scenes. And those things are things that we can combat moving forward. But the real kind of beautiful thing is there's this picture that somebody took. We, at the end of that time, and I played from vanilla through Cataclysm, so that's definitely the mid 2000s, is the guild came together in Oklahoma, and we had a WoW BQ, as I call it, so WoW barbecue, and we had a couple who got married, and I married them in game, and then I was the master of the ceremonies of their physical wedding in here, which was really nerdy and just completely it was hard to share that story in the 2000s. Now it's much easier. But that picture will always resonate in my mind because every skin tone is there. People, disability, enabled body, there. Gender, all present. Everything. And it was really the testament of the power of it. We had never met. Majority of us had never met prior to that time. And despite that initial kind of introverted awkwardness, was able to use that gaming synergy to start expanding the conversation past just World of Warcraft. What were our interests? What were our passions? What do we want to do with our lives? What was stressing us out? And that starts to feed into the needs that gaming represents for mental health and finding, your place. And despite, introverts still need social interaction, they just need it in different ways.
Sure.
And so that was really, really, really powerful. So right before that, not to mess up my timeline, but I also served in the Army. I'm a 3rd generation Army veteran, and I served for 6 years. I had enlisted right before, 3 months before 9/11. And even in that world, in the first, kind of generation of first-person shooters on consoles and multiplayer games like SOCOM, original Call of Duty, and things like that, also were a common thread with my peers in the military as a ways to pass time and wait for the next set of orders or tasks to do. And then we bring us into the current, or the previous decade now, 2021, where I worked for Apple. I worked for the Oklahoma Juvenile Facility. And those things really shaped how I built the OU program and what we wanted to achieve. What we built is very comprehensive. And when we sat down to strategize OU's development and what we wanted to be about and what we wanted to accomplish, we looked at 3 different things as our navigation, and they are still our navigation today. The first was the student pulse. What are students willing to do? What are they interested in? What are their passions? And what kind of things allow them to have free-flowing commentary, because it allows them to invest in it, build equity in themselves, and take ownership of a university, where taking ownership of that university is very similar to what we just talked about in athletics, where there's such a fragmentation between the structures that are in place for compliance in athletics programs that they're not really touchable. Mm-hmm. So that was the first order of things. No matter what we do, if students don't like it, and if students don't see at least the possibility or can't be swayed or convinced through debate that this is relevant, we don't do it and we'll revisit it later. The second was the university mission. What's the university strong in academically? What's the mission of the university? What are its policies? What are its student handbooks, its employee handbooks? So that we built the program already speaking the university's language. As we got more formality and more endorsement, we would already be on the same page. And then the final one is, what is the industry doing? What are companies like Evil Geniuses, FaZe Clan, 100 Thieves, TSM, Cloud9, what are they employing? What is their scope of intentionality? What kind of impacts are they making in the industry? What kind of expansions are they trying out? So that resulted in a 6-pillar organization. And I'm going to go through these really briefly,
Sure.
But the first one being leadership. How do we mentor the future middle management and upper management CEOs of companies like Cloud9, of these organizations? And for the predominance, those student leaders at the helm, they're sitting in meetings with me with big branded names or partner potentials or sponsors and having actual dialogue. They're not there to just shadow. They're there and empowered with their voice to advocate for the things that they care about. And then through that mentorship, understanding how to make it relevant for the specific needs of the program, as well as still providing exciting opportunities for the students that are still in alignment with the university's goals and missions and strategies for the future. The next pillar, community, the most important one, I'll emphasize again, has a two-pronged approach. How do we take care of our students? Every university tries to figure out how to engage their students better. So that can be intramurals, that can be just programming that transcends different departments. And we've been doing that since 2017. Mm-hmm. The other part of community is philanthropy and outreach. So in those 4 years of elevation from November 2018 to now, we've raised almost $9 grand and over 1,000 community service hours for needs in Oklahoma, and specifically Oklahoma youth. Now that community represents 1,700 plus members in our Discord, which represents the largest student organization on OU's campus by more than double. Wow. And the testament to why it's grown that far is because the community now self-regulates. If there's toxicity, it's worked through. If there is conflict, it's discussed. It's not something that just creates this tension. It's something that's worked through so that we can all grow and continue to protect the very thing that is important to us. The next pillar, news and media. We had to be our own ESPN. We had to be our own Kotaku, our own .esports, our own ESR. And that is represented in SoonerEsports.org, which is our own media outlet that is student-driven, where you will find articles from students about opinion pieces, interviews in the industry, hardware and software reviews, and event coverage. So one of my favorite examples that came out of that pillar back in 2018 when we launched it was the original editor-in-chief wrote an article about gender inequality in esports. But instead of regurgitating the statistics and analytics of the industry that almost all of us can recite by memory, she took it upon herself to reach out to influencers and personas in the industry and have them tell their firsthand stories of adversity, which then converted it into a very human condition article. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what the kind of voice we want to advocate for as we help kind of guide the powers that be and the general population and culture elevate their thought processes to support these things more and more and share who we are, whether that is a fan of something like League of Legends or the social impacts of Among Us and Fall Guys and Animal Crossing. All of that is welcome. Then we move on into our own production pillar, where we have a team that can do casting, overlays, manage Twitch, moderate panels, and put on production shows. So for us in the Midwest, we have two major rivalries in athletics. The first one being our own little sister university or big sister university, however you want to do. I'm not going to have that controversy between Oklahoma State University and OU as our Bedlam series. And then the other one, OU Texas, with University of Texas at Austin. And so that pillar is able to basically put on production to produce our own variants in esports for those specific activations, which help us kind of transcend the barriers of some of the generational gap or buy-in across the board. That fifth pillar is streaming entertainment. How do we help mentor streamers, influencers, people that understand the power of their own personal brand and just need some polish, some guidance to get started? Maybe they are introverted, but they are interested in streaming, which is a weird marriage, but it happens. So we help provide that first kind of wave of feedback to get their confidence up, help kind of rewire their brain a little bit to make sure that they're always engaging their community and feeding off their community and then feeding back to their community to make sure that their community is welcome. So that's the fifth pillar. And then finally, the sixth pillar, intercollegiate competition, which is the jersey in my background, to represent the university in formal competition. But this pillar also puts on summer camps and winter camps for youth. So we looked at a way of the needs of the entire industry as the career pipelines going through from K through 12 into higher education into post post-graduation, preparing students to do what they love and giving them the experiences at a formidable brand to take ownership of it. And the real beauty of this for our story is, aside from the time investment, this program has only cost the university $8,000.
Wow.
Largest student org, most intentional, most diverse, $8,000 to get it off the ground.
Wow.
And get it to this juncture. And so I'm going to share this with you because it's about to drop. And so by the time that you guys produce this, it should be absolutely public knowledge. But all 6 of those pillars for OU will be scholarship opportunities for fall 2021, not just competition. That means streamers, casters, news and media journalists, community TOs, and leadership will have equal scholarships moving forward because the industry needs those professionals.
Well, I'm just so impressed that you were able to squeeze all of that into $8,000. And you know, that's the type of thing that will get colleges going, and really spread it around.
And make no mistake, colleges that do see this understand that that was a lot of time investment. But the power of that was empowering the student voice to take ownership of what eventually would become, you know, the department at University of Esports, where students are absolutely still involved in the leadership, because the intentionality from day one was to keep that at the forefront.
Right.
And the stories that we'll be able to tell from that, of the students that we go and create for the industry that helped build the next component of OU's collective force, will have a very strong student narrative. And that's like the perfect story for a university, saying we innovated this topic. Our students that came to our university helped build it, and now they're personifying it through the execution of its intentionality, and will their jobs in the industry will echo that change. So obviously every university is looking at K through 12 energies, obviously what they're doing at their own campus, and then how to connect it into the career services department, into the workforce. So this functions as that literal massive pipeline to go from K through 12 into the career services and career fields. And instead, again, that path to pro that a lot of people fixate on, and a lot of people think that esports represents as the competitor, is just a singular 1/6 of the pie chart for OU. And it's not more important than any of the other 5 pillars. It's equally important, but all of them are equal. Again, I just shared like how they can intermingle and also be individual. And being able to flex that amount of diversification and intentionality from a business perspective means that I can sell and sponsor streamers directly, or I can sell and sponsor an event production, just like we see in the professional sector. We can put on events for both community engagement or bigger scale for regions. And we're building leadership that can help delegate that workload so that not any singular energy is overloaded, which is absolutely a problem in esports, where a lot of the pioneers are taking on 10 to 15 jobs at once. And the goal for higher education should always be to build professionals that can help stabilize and grow industries, especially ones that we see are coming.
Right.
And esports is still not here in a mainstream. So if we're at this juncture, there's no telling what it's going to look like in a decade from now.
Well, I think we're scratching the surface, but I really appreciate you, Mike, that you've developed for University of Oklahoma a formula that gives the student its own self-perpetuating power of growing that industry and moving it forward. It's manifestation.
Right.
And Mike, we're running out of time, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to discuss this subject with us. And we look forward to seeing what University of Oklahoma can do in the next few years.
Again, I appreciate the privilege of sharing insight with your audience and the interest in it in general.